taking sword wounds to the face and chest. 80 Roman senators die, men who came along to witness the glorious victory. 29 military tribunes, senior officers, are killed. The Roman army isn't just defeated, it's erased. By sunset, the field at Cannae is covered in bodies. 50,000 to 70,000 Romans dead. Some ancient sources say even more. Hannibal's losses? Around 6,000. Read that again. Hannibal killed 10 men for every one he lost, while being outnumbered 2 to 1. The next day, the survivors are rounded up. 10,000 Romans are captured, sold into slavery. Only 15,000 escape, most of them cavalry who ran early. Consul Varro, the one who ordered the attack, is among the survivors. He flees to Rome in disgrace. But here's something incredible. Rome doesn't execute him for losing the biggest battle in their history. They thank him for not despairing of the Republic. Why? Because Rome is about to do something that will define them forever. They refuse to surrender. Think about this. They just lost their entire army, the largest force they'd ever assembled. Gone. Any other nation would sue for peace, beg for terms. Not Rome. The Senate meets. They ban public mourning, too demoralizing. They free slaves to make new soldiers. They melt down temple decorations to make weapons. They tell Hannibal, "We will never surrender." And they mean it. Hannibal stands on the field at Cannae, surrounded by the greatest victory in military history. His cavalry commander, Hannibal, rides up to him with an idea. "Give me the cavalry," Hannibal says. "I'll ride to Rome right now. In 5 days, you'll be dining in the capital." Hannibal shakes his head. "No, I need time to think." Hannibal's reply becomes legendary. "You know how to win a battle, Hannibal, but you don't know how to use a victory." Was Hannibal right? Maybe. Here's what you need to understand. Hannibal's army is exhausted. He has no siege equipment. Rome's walls are formidable. More importantly, his entire strategy has been built on breaking Rome's alliances, getting Italian cities to rebel, starving Rome politically and economically. A direct assault on Rome could backfire. So Hannibal doesn't march on Rome. This decision will haunt military historians forever, because Rome survives, and over the next 14 years, they slowly, painfully grind Hannibal down. They avoid direct battle. They attack his supply lines. They retake cities one by one. Eventually, they invade North Africa, Carthage's homeland. Hannibal is forced to sail back to defend his own capital. In 202 BC, he loses his first and only major battle at Zama. Carthage surrenders. The war is over. Rome wins. But here's something they never told you about Cannae. The battle didn't just change military history, it changed human psychology. For 2,200 years, generals have studied Cannae. Not to copy it, that's nearly impossible, but to understand why it worked. Napoleon studied it. Eisenhower studied it. Schwarzkopf studied it before Desert Storm. The German army called their World War II invasion of France the Cannae of the modern age, a massive encirclement strategy. Even today, military academies around the world dedicate weeks to analyzing this single battle. Why? What makes Cannae so special? Because Hannibal understood something terrifying. He understood that human beings, when trapped and panicking, will actually help you kill them. The Romans died because they couldn't stop pushing forward. Their own aggression, their own confidence, their own numbers became weapons against them. Hannibal didn't overpower Rome. He made Rome destroy itself. That's genius. Dark, terrible genius. But there's an even darker truth hidden in this story. Cannae revealed something about warfare that most people don't want to face. Moral superiority doesn't win wars. Strategy does. Rome believed they were destined to win. They had the gods on their side. They had superior numbers. They had tradition and discipline. Hannibal had none of that. He was an outsider, an enemy of Rome, fighting far from home with a mercenary army that spoke half a dozen languages. But he had something more valuable than moral certainty. He had understanding. He understood terrain. He understood timing. He understood human nature. And he used that understanding to create a perfect killing field. Here's what's terrifying about that. Cannae proves something that most people don't want to face. Intelligence, when applied with cold precision, can overcome almost anything. Numbers, resources, righteousness. None of it mattered when faced with a mind like Hannibal's. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because Rome's response to Cannae tells us something profound about resilience. Most civilizations, after losing 20% of their military-aged population in a single afternoon, would collapse. Rome got stronger. How? They changed everything. They stopped fighting Hannibal the way he wanted to be fought. They appointed a general named Fabius Maximus who pioneered guerrilla tactics, avoid battle, harass supply lines, wait him out. The Romans called him the delayer. They mocked him for being cowardly. But his strategy worked. Then they found a general who could match Hannibal strategically. His name was Scipio Arcanus. Scipio studied Hannibal's tactics, learned from them, then used them against Carthage itself. This is the real lesson of Cannae, not the battle itself, but what came after. Rome lost the greatest battle in history and still won the war. They did it through adaptation, through stubbornness, through refusing to let one disaster, no matter how catastrophic, define them. But let's not lose sight of what actually happened on that field. 50,000 to 70,000 men died, most of them young, most of them conscripts who didn't choose this war. They died in one of the most horrible ways imaginable. Crushed, suffocated, hacked apart in the August heat. Many didn't die quickly. They lay wounded on the field overnight, listening to thousands of others moaning and crying for help that never came. When dawn broke on August 3rd, the survivors, the ones who'd hidden under corpses or played dead, crawled out from the piles of bodies. Some of them had been there for 12 hours, trapped under dead friends, covered in blood that wasn't theirs. Carthaginian soldiers moved through the field, mercy-killing the wounded Romans. It was a kindness compared to slowly bleeding out in the sun. This is the reality of ancient warfare. Not glorious, not heroic, just brutal, senseless mass death. And all of it, every single death, came down to two men's egos. Varro wanted glory. Hannibal wanted revenge. 70,000 people paid the price. You might be wondering why this matters today. Because Cannae teaches us something that's still relevant. Overconfidence is a killer. The Romans lost because they were so certain of their superiority that they walked into an obvious trap. They ignored warnings. They dismissed intelligence. They let pride override caution. Sound familiar? Throughout history, nations and leaders have made the same error. Napoleon in Russia, Hitler in Stalingrad, the US in Vietnam. Different eras, different technologies, same fundamental error. Underestimating your enemy, overestimating yourself. Cannae is a warning that echoes through time. Confidence without wisdom is suicide. Here's something else they don't tell you. The popular narrative is that Cannae was a clash of civilized Rome and barbaric Carthage. That's propaganda. The truth, both sides were equally brutal, equally sophisticated, equally human.
Carthage was a wealthy, cosmopolitan civilization. They had libraries, art, advanced agriculture. They were master sailors and traders. Rome would later destroy Carthage so completely that we don't even have Carthaginian historical records. Everything we know about Hannibal comes from Roman sources, his enemies. Think about that. The greatest military genius in history, and we only know his story because the people he humiliated wrote it down. Imagine how different the story might be if Carthage had survived to tell it. History is written by the survivors, not the victors. And in this case, the survivors hated Hannibal so much they turned him into a monster in their stories.
But here's the thing. Even Rome's own historians couldn't hide his brilliance. Even his enemies had to admit, this man was extraordinary. Let's talk about Hannibal for a moment. The man, not the myth. After Cannae, he spent 13 more years in Italy, winning battles, losing allies, watching his army slowly shrink. Carthage barely supported him. They sent no reinforcements, no supplies. Why? Because Carthage's government was divided. Some supported the war, others wanted peace with Rome. So Hannibal fought on, increasingly alone. By the end, he was a 45-year-old man who'd spent his entire adult life at war, who'd sacrificed everything for a cause his own government had abandoned. When he finally sailed home to defend Carthage, he must have known it was over. He lost at Zama. Carthage surrendered. Years later, Rome demanded he be handed over for execution. Rather than surrender, Hannibal took poison. His last words were reportedly, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have been so long under, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." Even in death, he mocked them. So what exactly made Cannae so brilliant? Let's break down the genius step by step. First, terrain. Hannibal chose ground that limited Roman maneuverability, the river on one side, hills on the other. The Romans couldn't flank him. Second, formation. The crescent shape served multiple purposes. It gave the Romans a target to focus on, the bulging center. It made them want to push forward, and it positioned his strong troops exactly where they'd need to be for the encirclement. Third, cavalry. Hannibal knew Rome's cavalry was weak. He destroyed it quickly, then used his cavalry mobility to attack from behind. No ancient army could survive being hit in the rear. Fourth, psychology. This is the masterpiece. Hannibal made the Romans kill themselves with their own tactics. Their discipline became a prison. Their numbers became a death trap. The tighter they packed together, their standard formation, the easier they were to kill. Fifth, timing. Everything happened in sequence. Cavalry battle first, center retreat second, flank attack third, rear attack last. Each phase set up the next, like dominoes falling. It was poetry, deadly, precise poetry. Let's talk about the math of horror. 50,000 to 70,000 men killed in 6 hours. That's approximately 8,000 to 11,000 deaths per hour, about 140 to 185 per minute. 2 to 3 men dying every single second for 6 straight hours. Ancient weapons were not efficient. No guns, no explosives, just swords, spears, and human muscle. That means every single death required individual effort. Somebody had to physically kill each person. Now imagine being one of Hannibal's soldiers. You're not just fighting, you're part of an industrial-scale killing operation. Your arms are burning from swinging your sword. You're covered in blood. The ground is slippery with it. And you just keep killing for hours because the Romans won't surrender, won't stop. They're trapped and they keep fighting because they have no other choice. That's the true horror of Cannae. Not the tactics, not the strategy, the sheer, relentless, mechanical slaughter. Here's a question that haunted me while researching this. Could the Romans have escaped? Theoretically, yes. If they'd broken discipline and scattered, many would have survived. But Roman military culture made that impossible. They were trained to hold formation, to never break ranks, to die with their legion rather than flee. That discipline made Rome great. It won them hundreds of battles. At Cannae, it killed them. Sometimes your greatest strength becomes your fatal weakness. The same discipline that made Roman legions unstoppable in open battle turned them into a stationary target when trapped. Hannibal knew this. He counted on it. He built a trap specifically designed for an enemy who wouldn't break ranks. And they didn't, even as they died. Roman soldiers stood in formation and fought until they literally couldn't lift their arms anymore. That's not bravery, that's tragedy. Let's remember the people history forgot. The young soldier in the opening, he probably had a name like Marcus or Gaius. He had a family waiting in Rome, maybe a mother who made him promise to come home, a girl he wanted to marry, dreams of a farm somewhere quiet. None of that mattered on August 2nd. He died in the dust, surrounded by strangers, far from home. Multiply him by 50,000. That's the real cost of Cannae. Not the tactical lessons, not the strategic implications. 50,000 individual human stories ended, erased. Most of them we'll never know. The blacksmith's apprentice from Rome, the farmer's son from Latium, the merchant's grandson from Campania. All of them gone in a single afternoon. Because two men, Hannibal and Varro, made decisions that turned human beings into chess pieces. War isn't about glory, it's about destruction. And Cannae was destruction perfected. 2,240 years later, we're still talking about Cannae. Military academies still study it, historians still debate it, strategy games still simulate it. Why? Because Cannae represents something that fascinates and terrifies us. Perfect execution. In a chaotic, brutal, unpredictable activity like war, Hannibal created a moment of absolute control. He predicted enemy movements, he manipulated their psychology, he orchestrated a symphony of death, and it worked exactly as planned. That's both inspiring and horrifying. Inspiring because it shows what human intelligence can achieve. Horrifying because of what it achieved. The most efficient killing operation in ancient history. Here's the ultimate irony. Hannibal won the greatest tactical victory in military history, and he still lost the war. Rome, despite losing Cannae and multiple other battles, eventually crushed Carthage. They didn't just defeat them, they erased them. In 146 BC, 70 years after Cannae, Rome finally destroyed Carthage completely. They killed or enslaved everyone, burned the city, allegedly salted the earth so nothing would grow. Carthage ceased to exist. So what's the lesson? Winning battles doesn't win wars. Strategy matters, resources matter, but most of all, will matters. Rome had the will to survive Cannae. Carthage didn't have the will to support Hannibal. That made all the difference. Hannibal could win every battle and still lose because Rome refused to accept defeat. That's not a military lesson. That's a lesson about human stubbornness. And maybe that's why Rome became an empire and Carthage became a footnote. One more thing about Hannibal. We call him a genius, and he was. But genius in war
means genius at killing. Yes, his tactics were brilliant. Yes, his strategy was sophisticated. Yes, he accomplished the impossible. But at the end of the day, he used that genius to slaughter 50,000 people. That's uncomfortable to think about. We celebrate military genius, we study it, we admire it, but we often forget what it actually means. It means being exceptionally good at organizing violence, at predicting where people will be so you can kill them more efficiently. Is that really something to celebrate? I don't know. History hasn't decided. We call Alexander the Great. We call Hannibal a genius. We name streets after Caesar. But we rarely name streets after the 50,000 who died at Cannae. Maybe that says something about us. So here we are, 2,240 years later, still haunted by a field in southern Italy where the ground turned red. Still trying to understand how one man orchestrated perfect death. Still debating whether genius justifies horror. Still learning from a battle where everything went wrong for 50,000 people and perfectly right for one man. This is why you need to know this story. Not because it's exciting, though it is. Not because it's dramatic, though it definitely is. But because Cannae teaches us something fundamental about human nature. About overconfidence and consequences. About how our strengths can destroy us. About how intelligence without wisdom leads to tragedy. And maybe most importantly, about how we choose to remember horror. We remember Hannibal. We study his tactics. We admire his genius. But do we remember Marcus or Gaius or whatever that young soldier's name was? Do we remember the 50,000 who died so we could have a lesson in military strategy? Maybe it's time we did. Because war isn't an abstract thing. It's not just tactics and strategy and grand narratives. It's individuals. It's fathers and sons. It's futures erased. And Cannae, for all its tactical brilliance, was fundamentally a human tragedy. 50,000 human tragedies, actually, stacked on top of each other in a field in Italy. That's the Battle of Cannae. Not a military masterstroke, a massacre. Not a glorious victory, a catastrophe. Not a moment of triumph, a moment of horror. And we're still 2,240 years later trying to make sense of it. Maybe we never will. Maybe that's the point. Some horrors are meant to haunt us, to remind us what we're capable of, both the brilliance and the brutality, the genius and the genocide, the perfect trap, the perfect slaughter, the perfect nightmare. Welcome to Cannae. Now you know why they never talk you the whole truth.